I'd just been busted for giving the chimpanzees water balloons when I first heard something was wrong at Hippo River. Large Marge was the one who caught me. No surprise there. Marge O'Malley was a security guard, but all she did most days was follow me around, waiting for me to cause trouble. I saw her slinking after me all the time. She'd always try to hide behind rocks and trees and stuff, but it was never hard to spot her, because Marge was built like a rhinoceros. "You're in big trouble this time, Teddy," she snarled. She was making a big show of apprehending me in front of a crowd of tourists, shoving me up against the rail of the chimp exhibit and frisking me for weapons, like I was a mugger in some urban back alley, instead of a 12-year-old boy at Funjungle, the newest, most family-friendly theme park in the world. "Why don't you arrest some real criminals for once?" I asked. "Right now, you're the only person I see making trouble." "That's just 'cause you're not paying attention." It was true. Half the park guests broke the rules. There were signs posted everywhere telling them not to feed the animals or bang on the glass of their exhibits or harass them in any way, but they all did it anyhow. Only 10 feet from where Marge was sitting, patting me down, an entire family was pelting a baby chimp with peanuts. They weren't trying to feed it, which would have been bad enough. The animals have very restricted diets, keeping them sick. They were laughing every time they hit. "Watch this. I'll bet I could hit him right in the head." Right as he was about to let it fly, though, a huge red water balloon sailed out of the exhibit and nailed him in the face. It exploded on contact, drenching him. Before he could recover, another balloon hit him, and another, and another. The chimps were fighting back, just as I'd hoped. That's why I'd armed them. If the security guards were going to protect the animals, then I figured I ought to help the animals protect themselves. After all, how would you like it if someone banged on your windows and chucked peanuts at you all day? Within seconds, the whole chimpanzee troop was lobbying with balloons, howling with delight as they pelted the family from all sides, slipping in the water and spluttering for air, and now everyone was laughing at them. Well, everyone but Large Marge, who was born without a sense of humor. She whipped out her radio and alerted headquarters. "HQ, this is Molly O'Malley. We have a water balloon situation at Monkey Mountain. I've apprehended the perpetrator, Mr. Theodore Fitzroy, but I need backup." Marge always spoke like she's seen way too many cop movies. "Never mind that," the dispatcher responded. "Get over to Hippo River. We're getting reports that something's wrong over there." Marge frowned. Though not out of concern for the hippos, she was annoyed her request for backups had been ignored. "I don't think you appreciate the magnitude of the situation here. This is coming straight from Buck," the dispatcher said, meaning Buck Grassley, the chief of Funjungle security. "Hippo River is a code red. If you're at Monkey Mountain, you're the closest to the scene. So get over there. Now." Marge snapped upright and jammed her radio back in its holster. The idea that there was an actual emergency had stirred something in my ear. She grabbed my ear and dragged me toward the exit. "Don't think this saves your bacon, mister. You're still in trouble for what you did to that poor family. That family ought to save me. If I hadn't given the chimps water balloons, they'd have thrown poop." I wasn't making that up. I'd seen chimps defend themselves in the wild by throwing their own feces. But as usual, trying to explain anything to Marge was useless. "Watch your language or I'll wash your mouth with soap," she snapped. A family that had been bombarded with balloons stormed out of Monkey Mountain right behind us, so soaked that their shoes sloshed. "See if we ever come to this park again," the mother announced indignantly. Good riddance, I thought, stifling a smile. The truth was, except for Marge's vice grip on my ear, I was happy to be heading to Hippo River. I wasn't sure what a code red meant, but it promised to be interesting. Maybe some clumsy tourist had fallen into the exhibit and needed to be rescued. Technically, that was probably a bad thing to hope for. Most people didn't realize that hippos are actually the second most dangerous animals. Water buffalo are the first. They're mean, they're unpredictable, and they have razor-sharp teeth a feet long. In the wild, they've been known to stomp lions to death and bite crocodiles in half. If someone fell into a hippo's territory, they'd be screwed. But after a few weeks at Funjungle, I was bored out of my skull and willing to take excitement anywhere I could find it. That might seem pretty surprising, given that I spent every day at a place that claimed to be America's most exciting family destination. Funjungle was the biggest, most elaborate zoo ever built, and had been jam-packed since it opened 2 weeks before. But unlike the thousands of kids who visited every day, I didn't go home when the park closed at night. I was home. Both my parents worked there. My mom was a famous gorilla researcher. My dad was a renowned wildlife photographer. I'd met when National Geographic had sent him to photograph Mom's gorillas. Now Mom oversaw the care and research of all of Funjungle's primates, while Dad worked for the publicity department, taking glamour shots of the animals for websites and magazines. Funjungle had been built way out in the Texas Hill Country where land was cheap. The closest city, San Antonio, was more than half an hour away, so the park had provided housing for my family and a few other animal specialists who'd come to work there. Our family homes sat just beyond the back fence. None of the other specialists had children, though, which meant I was the only kid for 30 miles in any direction. Now, don't go thinking I was bored because I don't like animals. I do. In fact, I bet I know more about animals than any 12-year-old you've ever met. I spent the first decade of my life living in a tent in the African Congo. I didn't see a TV until I was six. Instead, I watched animals, and Mom and Dad taught me everything they know. I learned how to track elephants, communicate with chimps, and defend myself against a hungry leopard. Heck, I learned about animals you've probably never even heard of. Bongos, hammerkops, gaboon vipers, guenons. My first friend was a gorilla my age named Mafuzi. I love being around animals every day. I was bored because, until not long before, I'd had an amazingly exciting life. Living in the Congo was one of the incredible experiences after another. And when I did leave the jungle, it was always to visit fascinating places with my father on his assignments. Dad was a real adrenaline junkie, and he encouraged me to embrace adventure. We'd rappelled into caves to find giant bats in Mexico, stalked tigers in Uttar Pradesh, and even snorkeled with blue whales off Fiji. But then, right after I turned 10, a civil war broke out in the Congo, and my parents decided it was no longer safe to raise me there. If not for me, they probably would have risked their lives to stay with gorillas. Mom grabbed the first job she could find back at the States, a research position at Emory Primate Labs in Atlanta, but that was a bust. None of us was happy in Georgia. We all missed Africa terribly. So my folks were offered work at Funjungle, which billed itself as the closest you can get in America to being on safari. Figured living there might be more fun for all of us, and for a while, it was. Funjungle was by far the best zoo in the world. All the reviews said so. It was 3 times larger than the next biggest zoo. Its exhibits were innovative, and there was plenty to do. But it still wasn't the Congo. After a few weeks, to keep myself amused, I'd had to resort to playing practical jokes, like giving the chimps water balloons, or switching the signs on the men's and women's restrooms, or replacing all the black jelly beans in Large Marge's lunch with rabbit poop. That's why I was fine with letting myself be dragged along the Hippo River. I was only hoping for a little excitement. It never occurred to me that Henry would be dead. It didn't occur to Marge either. She shoved through the crowd at Mabuko Hippo Overlook. She dragged me by my ear, flashing her little tin badge, and suddenly, there Henry was, lying in the shallow water of his enclosure, all 4 legs pointing straight at the sky. Most of Henry, and there was about 4,000 pounds of him, was underwater, resting on the bottom of his pool. I couldn't see his body, since the water was clouded with hippo poop, as usual. Only his feet were visible, jutting above the surface, pale white now that the blood had drained from them. They were thick and stubby, looking like giant moldy marshmallows floating in day-old hot chocolate. Isn't that cute, a mother asked her children? Henley's sleeping upside down. Marge's grip finally relaxed on my ear. She was so stunned she'd forgotten about me. Instead, she stared at Henry vacantly, not knowing what to do. She wasn't the only one. There was always a crowd at Mabuko Hippo Overlook, but today was more packed than usual. Maybe word had got out that Henry had kicked the bucket, and some folks had come running to see. But most of the visitors appeared to have been caught by surprise. They just stood there, gaping at those feet, unable to believe Henry the Hippo was dead. I admit I was pretty shocked myself. Since Funjungle had more than 5,000 animals on display, you you expected things would go wrong now and then. Every day, dozens of animals got sick. Maybe even one or two would die. But for Henry to go belly up, that was pretty much the worst case scenario, given that he was the park's mascot. Funjungle had been advertising all over the world for a year before it opened, and every one of those ads, every TV commercial, radio spot, and billboard featured Henry. Well, not the actual Henry, but a cartoon version of him who said corny things like, "Come visit Funjungle, it's more fun than a barrel of monkeys, and I ought to know." Cartoon Henry didn't look much like the real Henry. He was skinny, purple, and friendly, while the real Henry was fat, gray, and lean. But that didn't seem to bother the tourists. Henry was famous, so they flocked to see him. It was bizarre. There was a far more interesting hippo, Hildegard, in the exhibit right next to Henry's, but most guests didn't give her a second glance. Hildegard could have done backflips, and everyone still would have been packed 10 deep to watch Henry nap. "Wake up, Henry, it's time to get up," a little boy near me yelled. Several other boys decided this was a good idea and joined in. Their parents looked at one another blankly. Cartoon Henry had told them all that a day at Funjungle was supposed to be non-stop fun. Explaining the circle of life and death threatened to be quite the opposite. "Johnny, please," said my mother. Her son was happily proving that he could chant the loudest. "I don't think Henry is going to wake up. Hippos are very sound sleepers." "That's right," a queasy-looking father added. "Plus, his ears are underwater." Hippo River wasn't the most popular exhibit at Funjungle, though this wasn't only because of Henry. It was right by the main entrance, the first thing visitors saw as they came through the front gates, and it was pretty spectacular, as it should have been. I heard Funjungle had spent more than $30 million on it. The exhibit took up 10 acres, and once you entered it, it was really like being in Africa. Started at a thundering 150-foot waterfall, then hiked through a jungle filled with birds and monkeys, visiting scenic viewpoints from which you could see flocks of flamingos, huge Nile crocodiles, and of course, the hippos. Each viewpoint had a quaint name that had been designed by a computer, some African, even though they meant absolutely nothing. Ngadongo Gorge, Lalabazi, Bazin, Woolamon Camp. The real draw of Hippo River, however, was the underwater viewing areas, places where you could watch the hippos through huge glass walls. This wasn't a revolutionary idea. Lots of zoos had similar exhibits for viewing polar bears, and a few even had one for hippos, but no one had anything on the scale that Funjungle did. The folks who designed Funjungle were actually pretty smart about animals. They knew hippos were far more interesting below water than they were above it. Heck, a lot of the time, and I know from experience, you can watch the surface for hours and never ever see a hippo. They need to breathe only once every 10 minutes, and even then, they usually poke just their nostrils out. But underwater, it's a whole different story. Hippos play, swim, give birth, eat, and nurse their young on river bottoms. Mom also told me they make baby hippos down there. But Funjungle kept Henry and Hildegard separated during visiting hours to make sure that didn't happen in front of the guests. Plus, while hippos look like big, lazy sacks of fat on land, they're surprisingly graceful in the water. So Funjungle had 8 gigantic windows to view them through, and even a pricey restaurant where the prime tables were right against the glass. Guests could have a $14 hamburger and watch hippos swim past a foot away. Can't do that in Africa. Unfortunately, there had been a few glitches with the exhibit. Most obviously, the water filtration system wasn't strong enough. Henry ate nearly 100 pounds of poop a day and sent most of it straight through his digestive tract, clouding the water faster than the filters could clean it. If Henry stayed near the windows, where the water flow was better, you could get a decent, if somewhat hazy view of him. But Henry preferred to spend his time in a small backwater of his enclosure, wallowing in his own filth. This rendered the underwater viewing areas all but useless. Restaurant patrons ended up eating their $14 burgers with nothing to see except sewage. Of course, this was now a relatively minor problem. It was June in Texas, which meant it was 98 degrees in the shade. Under the harsh glare of the sun, Henry was starting to smell worse than usual, which was really saying something. Hippos are naturally quite flatulent, but Henry was the worst I'd ever encountered. He could emit powerful odors, enough to make you nauseated 50 feet away. "He's not sleeping," a little girl said, wrinkling her nose in disgust. "He's dead." Other parents' eyes widened. The girl's parents immediately shriveled under everyone's gaze. "No, he isn't," her mother said hopefully. Hippos don't die like that. When hippos die, they float to the top, like goldfish. He's dead, the little girl announced again. Let's go see the elephant, said her father. All the other parents thought this was a wonderful idea. Maybe they're still alive, another father said under his breath. None of the kids wanted to leave, though. Those who thought Henry was sleeping were intent on waking him. Those who suspected he was dead were fascinating. Know how kids sometimes can't help staring at something they're disgusted by, like roadkill? Well, imagine how captivating roadkill the size of a minivan would be. The parents who didn't look squeamish were growing annoyed. Many turned to Marge, expecting that, as the only person in the vicinity wearing a Funjungle uniform, she should be doing something to address the situation. Marge just kept staring slack-jawed at Henry's corpse. Marge wasn't the best decision-maker on normal days. I'd seen her take 10 minutes to decide whether to have the fried chicken bucket or the triple nachos grande for lunch. For the record, she'd ultimately opted for both. Faced with an actual crisis, her brain had apparently overloaded and shut down. Nearby, a teenager dressed in Henry Hippo costume paced nervously, unsure what to do. His job usually didn't require much thinking. He was essentially supposed to stand still, wave hello, and let tourists take his picture. Buko Overlook had been selected as the best place for this was because it offered the most shade. The Henry costume was thick and heavy and had poor ventilation. In the direct Texas sun, it could get quickly over 120 degrees inside. On the first few days the park was open, the Henry portrayers had mistakenly been stationed at unshaded Malumbo Point. Two had passed out from dehydration, collapsing on small children. The actors only had hour-long shifts because they had to drink a ton of water to survive in their suits and would inevitably have to pee. However, their job orders stated that during that hour they were never to leave their posts, no matter what. The Henry on duty now obviously felt like he shouldn't be there, looking around the dead hippo like a ghost. But he didn't want to get in trouble either. An excited family came along, unaware that the real Henry lay dead just around the corner, and positioned their children at the fake Henry's feet for a photo. The worried actor fidgeted so nervously that the mother had to steady his hands twice. It seemed someone should take care of this, but since Marge was a basket case, that left me. Once the family had taken their pictures, I approached the actor and told him, "You should probably get out of here." "Are you from administration?" Henry asked, contorting to get a look at me. The costume had been designed so the actor could only see through some gauze in Henry's open mouth, which was angled downward. It was well suited to prevent the actors from stepping on children, but not for looking people in the face, as had been proved on several occasions, avoiding low-hanging tree branches. Since I was standing outside of his range of sight, the actor had no way to tell I was 12. "Yes," I said. "Now move it before you freak anyone else out." "Yes, sir." The actor hurried away so quickly he forgot to watch his feet, stumbled over a bench, and face planted in the landscaping. I shook my head in disgust. Some people have way too much respect for authority. Henry staggered to his feet and reeled away drunkenly, scaring a few guests. A hand clamped on my shoulder. I spun around to find Martin Delgado glaring at me. Martin was the director of operations at Funjungle, which was an odd choice because he hated children and animals. Dad said he was supposed to be some hot-shot business genius, though. I could usually spot him coming from a mile away. As in a park crowded with plaid tourists, he was the only person wearing a three-piece suit. Martin was perpetually overworked and constantly appeared to be 5 seconds from a heart attack, but he still somehow found time every day to chastise me for doing something wrong. "Who gave you permission to dismiss my employees?" he demanded. "I figured someone needed to do something," I replied, seeing as Marge has gone brain dead. Martin gave me a glare so hot I could imagine eggs frying on his bald head. "Why would anyone need to dismiss the actors? Because of what happened to Henry," I said. Martin looked at me blankly, and I realized to my surprise that he didn't know about Henry yet. He turned toward Mbuko Overlook and took in the stunned crowd. I guess in his haste to reprimand me, he hadn't noticed them. His anger was quickly replaced by concern. "What's wrong with Henry?" he asked. I'd been reading about ancient Rome the night before. Apparently they used to kill messengers who brought bad news. "You should probably see for yourself," I told him. Keeping his hand locked on my shoulder, Martin shoved through the crowd. When Marge finally saw him, she snapped out of her comatose state and pretended she was doing something important. Martin blew right past her and caught his first glimpse of Henry. He said something in Spanish. I didn't know what it meant, but I'll bet $100 it was something for which I'd been sent to my room for saying in English. Maybe half a second, Martin seemed truly saddened by Henry's death, and then his inner administration kicked in. He immediately went to damage control mode. Go find Doc, he told me. Wherever he is, tell me to find him ASAP. Tell him to get over to me ASAP. I considered pointing out it was a bit too late for the head vet to help Henry, but decided against it. Martin probably wanted to get rid of me as much as he wanted to locate Doc. Meanwhile, his attention was already on other things. He instructed Marge to get all tourists out of there, then started barking orders onto his radio. I knew better than to stick around after Martin had essentially told me to scram, but I felt compelled to take one last look at Henry. I'd seen plenty of deaths in Africa, so I wasn't freaked out by animal corpses, but something really bothered me about this. I'd been at Hippo River the day before, and Henry had been in a rare good mood, prancing about on the river bottom, putting on a great show for the tourists. He was only 20, which was a young age for a hippo, and he'd certainly looked healthy. It didn't make sense for him to be dead. Suddenly, Marge grabbed me by the collar, yanking me away from the overlook. What are you still doing here? She growled, trying to guess who's bigger, Henry or you. Marge's eyes narrowed in anger, but I wrenched free of her grasp before she could do anything. Then I raced off into Funjungle, leaving the corpse of the world's most famous hippopotamus behind. Chapter 2. Damage Control. I found Doc out in Safariland, trying to lance a boil on a warthog. This would have been a pretty easy procedure if his patient had been a human. A boil is... Boil's really just a big pus-filled sack on the skin, sort of like a giant zit, only a lot more painful. Lancing it means popping it with a sterile needle so the pus can run out and the swelling can go down. It takes only a few seconds, but you can't explain that to a warthog. You can't say, if you hold still for a moment, I'll make you feel better. All the warthog knew was it was in pain, it was angry, and the last thing it wanted to see was some guy coming at it with a giant needle. For this reason, a lot of zoos would have just darted the warthog with sedative, waited it for its sleep, and then the job nice and easy. But Doc wasn't like that. Mom and Dad both said he was one of the top vets in the country, maybe even the best. He'd run the veterinary hospital at the prestigious Bronx Zoo before Funjungle had tried to lure him away. Doc hated using sedatives because he was tricky to get the dosage exactly right. If you gave the animal too little, it might wake up in the middle of the procedure and attack you. So most people tried to err on the side of caution. The problem was, if you gave the animal too little, if you gave the animal too much sedative, it might fall asleep and never wake up again. Doc didn't like people a whole lot, but he really cared about animals. He hated the thought of them dying for no reason. So rather than take that chance, he and two of the biggest zookeepers he could find were out in the broiling sun trying to pin down the pissed-off warthog and lance it without being gored by its tusks. Doc hated to use the sedatives because it's too tricky to get the dosage exactly right. Doc didn't like people a whole lot, but he really cared about animals. He hated the thought of one dying for no reason. So rather than take that chance, he and two of the biggest zookeepers he could find were out in the broiling sun trying to pin down a pissed-off warthog and lance it without being bored by its tusks. It didn't look like the best time to inform Doc that Henry was dead. The med had been trying to subdue the warthog for a while, with no success. And Doc was in a nasty mood. But then, Doc tended to be in a nasty mood most of the time anyhow. So I figured maybe he'd be too distracted by the warthog to get angry with me for bringing bad news. Doc had just backed the warthog into a corner of his paddock when I arrived. He was a tall man, well-muscled from years of overpowering animals and baked brown from long days in the sun, with a mustache so thick it looked like a woolly bear caterpillar had fallen asleep on his upper lip. He groaned when he saw me, though I didn't take it personally. Doc pretty much groaned in response to anyone approaching him. The only person he actually seemed to like was my mom. They'd met 15 years earlier when she'd done a gorilla research apprenticeship at the Bronx Zoo. "Beat it, Teddy," he snapped. "I'm busy." I'm not sure what I'd ever done to earn Doc's distaste, but I think being human was merely enough. "Martin told me to come get you," I said. Doc's reaction proved he liked Martin even less than me. "Go tell Martin to go jump in a lake." "Henry's dead," I told him. Doc and the other keepers were surprised enough to take their eyes off of the angry warthog. They all glanced at me for a moment to confirm I wasn't making a joke, then quickly returned their attention to the patient before he could make a run for it. "For how long?" Doc asked. "I don't know. I guess." I checked my watch. It had taken me almost 20 minutes to track Doc down. First I'd been told he was in the swamp, then the Amazon adventure, and then finally Safari Lane. I'd run myself ragged looking for him. 45 minutes? An hour maybe? Any idea why the old idiot croaked? "I think that's what Martin wanted to talk to you about. He wants to see you ASAP." "Why?" "Henry's dead. It's not like he can get worse." "I don't know why. He just said to find you. Tell Martin to find a place for an autopsy, and I'll be along when I can." "An autopsy? For Henry? Martin's not gonna like that." Doc smiled, for it was probably the first time that day. "No, I suspect he won't like it at all." It seems surprising that Doc wasn't upset by Henry's death. There was a perfectly good reason for this. Henry was the meanest zoo animal of all time. Hippos already have a reputation for being among the most foul-tempered members of the animal kingdom. But even keepers who had worked with hippos for years thought Henry was the nastiest one they'd ever come across. You couldn't have picked a worse animal to be the mascot of a multi-billion-dollar family theme park. Its selection had been a colossal screw-up. To understand how it happened, though, you need to know how Funjungle came to be. Funjungle had been built by the Texas billionaire J.J. McCracken. J.J. always admitted he didn't know much about animals, but he knew a heck lot about making money. He'd been born dirt poor in a small town not far from where Funjungle now sat, and somehow managed to parlay a couple $100 he'd won in a poker game into enough money to make him the third richest man in America. The way J.J. spoke about it, it sounded like anyone could do it. But the fact was, he had a gift. Whatever he invested in always made money. Dad often said that if J.J. McCracken set his money on fire, the next day, burned dollars would be worth more than gold. Despite being so rich, J.J. had a reputation as a friendly, folksy guy who'd never let having money go to his head. Instead of wearing fancy suits, he preferred blue jeans and sneakers. Rather than live in some Beverly Hills mansion, he had a ranch in Texas Hill County near his hometown. He drove a pickup truck instead of riding in a limo and preferred barbecue to sushi. And whenever he was interviewed about how he thought of Funjungle, he inevitably gave all the credit to his 13-year-old daughter, Summer. Summer had only been 6 when she'd given J.J. the idea. Planted the seed, was how he always put it. Like most children, she'd loved animals, so when her dad had given her the choice of going anywhere in the world for vacation, she'd asked to go on safari in Africa. J.J. had agreed, but then learned no safari company would take anyone under the age of 7, no matter how much he was willing to pay. When he broke this news to Summer, she was devastated. Why wasn't there any place for children to go on safari in America? She'd asked. Good question, her father had replied, and decided to build one. Of course, J.J. McCracken wouldn't have built Funjungle merely to please his daughter. No, he smelled profit. His research staff quickly discovered that zoos and aquariums attracted more than 500 million visitors in America each year, more than all sporting events combined. So then J.J. reasoned, if he built a zoo impressive enough to siphon off only a fraction of those people, he'd make a mint. To lure all those tourists, however, Funjungle had to be more than just a zoo. It had to be a theme park as well, a place people would be willing to cross the country to see, a place they'd visit for days on end, a place they'd want to come back every year. J.J. declared that Funjungle should be a combination of a San Diego wild animal park and Disney World, and then proceeded to steal ideas from each. Safariland, for example, was directly copied from San Diego. Several massive enclosures, each more than a square mile in size, held hundreds of animals living together in a smell of the wild. There were 2 ways to see it. You could take a 30-minute monorail around the perimeter, or for an extra $100 per person, you could take a personal safari inside the enclosures. You travel in a Land Rover with a guide and only a few other people. I gotten to do this for free with my parents for the before the park opened, and I have to admit, it was darn close to going on safari in Africa. Maybe even better, because at Funjungle, they let you feed the rhinos apples by hand. Funjungle had all sorts of other attractions that other zoos didn't. There were souped-up animal exhibits like the Polar Pavilion, an indoor polar bear and penguin exhibit where it really snowed, or Blue Planet, the world's largest saltwater aquarium, featuring a man-made coral reef you could snorkel over, and several pools where you could pay to swim with dolphins. There were shows where animals performed tricks, a sky ride, carnival midway, water slides, 2 huge play areas for kids, Mom called them jungle gyms on steroids, and even a few vaguely educational thriller rides. My favorite was Life of a Bee, which used a motion simulator to put riders through a harrowing 5 minutes of being attacked by everything from birds to fly swatters. It was awesome. In addition to the park, JJ also planned to make money from the hotels around it, which he owned. There were only 2 so far, although others were slated for construction. They were unlike any other hotels in America. One was a safari lodge on the edge of Safariland, and the other was a Caribbean resort next to the Blue Planet snorkeling area. They were extremely well designed. Visiting each place felt like going to a whole different country. Neither place was cheap, but both were booked solid more than a year in advance. Finally, there was merchandising. To be really profitable, JJ knew Funjungle had to keep making money long after people visited it. To do this, he stole an idea from Disney. The park shouldn't just have animals, it should have characters. To most people, one hippo was exactly like the other, but if you created a personality a la Henry the Hippo, people wouldn't simply want to see him. They'd buy anything with his picture on it. Now, even if you didn't know Henry was a jerk, it still might have seemed like a bad idea to make a hippopotamus the cornerstone of a merchandise empire. After all, as mammals went, hippos were fat, dangerous, and not particularly attractive. But merchandise wasn't about selling reality. As JJ often pointed out incorrectly, Mickey Mouse was just a rat in suspenders. The real reason for selecting Henry as the mascot had far more to do with television than biology. JJ knew that it would take years to build Funjungle, so he decided to create excitement about its inhabitants well ahead of time. He already owned a cable TV network, so he ordered his employees to develop an animated series called Funjungle Friends. Here he was stealing another idea from Disney, which had used the wonderful world of Disney to blatantly market Disneyland before it opens. It was a good idea to steal, though. Not only could JJ plug in his own theme park, but he got advertisers to pay him to do it. Funjungle Friends was originally about a bunch of zoo animals who'd slip out of their cages after the keepers went home and have all sorts of wacky adventures. Eleanor Elephant, Zelda Zebra, Larry the Lizard, and Uncle Orang were the stars. Henry Hippo was supposed to be only a minor character at first. He didn't even appear until the 4th episode. But for some reason, people loved him. Even the animators couldn't quite figure out why. Maybe children found Henry non-threatening. Maybe he was just a particularly attractive shade of purple. Whatever the case, he was a hit. Henry Hippo merchandise began outselling that of all the other characters by a huge margin. And his cry of excitement, Zinkies McPinkies, quickly became a natural catchphrase. JJ was thrilled. Funjungle Friends quickly became The Henry Hippo Show. A series of Henry Hippo movies was greenlit, and Henry was named the Funjungle spokesperson, or rather, spokesanimal. The park was reconfigured to place Henry Hippo's exhibit right by the front gates. The marketing department began slapping Henry's face on every piece of merchandise you could think of. On this show, Henry started imploring kids to visit him at Funjungle years before the park even opened. The effect was immediate. Children across the world and country clamored for Funjungle vacations. Families came to Texas just to see the construction site. Henry was a phenomenon, and he made Funjungle a phenomenon along with him. Throughout it all, however, no one had ever stopped to consider what a real hippopotamus was like. Of course, anyone who knew a whit about hippos would have, but no animal specialists were hired at Funjungle until long after the decision to revere Henry had been made. The hardest thing about getting a zoo from scratch isn't building it, it's getting the animals. Can't walk into a closest pet store and ask for a couple of hippos. 100 years ago, when zoos were a new concept, they all used to simply capture the animals in the wild, and when those zoos died, they'd go back and get more. Today, most animals are so endangered, so regulations have been established to prevent taking them from their natural habitats. Instead, most animals are produced from other zoos or official breeding facilities. The places aren't like puppy farms, though, churning out new animals as they can. Hippos only give birth to 1 or 2 young a year, tops. Hippo River had enclosures for 4 hippos, but it wasn't until construction was almost completed that anyone discovered pursuing even 1 hippo might be difficult. Naturally, J.J. McCracken wasn't pleased to hear this. I heard he threw a chair through a glass plate window, or a plate glass window. Then he demanded his people get him at least 1 hippopotamus, and do it fast. Funjungle couldn't open without a Henry, so the purchasing department scrambled to find a hippo, any hippo, and in their haste, they ended up with the worst hippo in America. Henry was originally named Brutus, and he'd already been in 4 different zoos before Funjungle got him. Each place couldn't wait to get rid of him. First of all, he was dangerous. In Boston, he'd bitten 3 keepers badly enough to send them to the hospital. And in Seattle, he'd squashed a keeper up against the side of his enclosure so hard that he cracked 4 of the animal's ribs, then kept him pinioned there for half an hour until being coaxed away by a box of Twinkies. Next, there was the mating problem. In order to increase their animal population, zoos usually try to pair all their male animals with females. This had been attempted with Brutus every place he'd lived. His interaction with females had been limited to 2 emotions, complete disinterest and occasional bursts of inexplicable anger. The females would at first find him cold and aloof. In Los Angeles, where they tended to physicalize things a bit too much, one keeper had accused Brutus of giving the female he was paired with a devastating case of low self-esteem. And then one day, for no particular reason, Brutus would turn against his partner on a full-force attack, biting, kicking, butting them with his head. On several occasions, Brutus had to be tranquilized before he mortally wounded his mate. Finally, there had been the poop. In the wild, male hippopotamuses occasionally exhibit an extremely disgusting method of battling for dominance. They aim their butts at one another and fire feces. This had been rarely documented at zoos, probably because male hippos were usually kept apart, and until Brutus had arrived on the scene, it had never been witnessed in any situation other than dominance conflicts. Brutus seemed to think it was funny. He genuinely enjoyed shooting poop at people. There was no rhyme or reason to it, except that he was said to have an uncanny knack for knowing which zoo visitor was wearing the most expensive outfit. Without any warning, he'd hoist his rear out of the water and fire away. In the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., where the walls around the hippo pit were unfortunately low, in the course of 1 week, Brutus had sullied 2 senators, the Secretary of the State, the Swedish ambassadors, and the president's daughter, along with 4 of her Secret Service agents. After that, even the conservation-minded National Zoo Association had given serious consideration to putting Brutus to sleep. Fortunately, a small circus had offered to buy him. They put up with him for only 2 months. He'd bitten 3 clowns and taken to firing feces at the audience every time he was brought into the center ring. The circus's owners were ready to feed Brutus to the lions when they heard Funjungle was desperate for a hippopotamus. The owners quickly fudged Brutus's records, claiming he was an entirely different hippo. They didn't feed him for 3 days before the Funjungle purchasing department came to visit, so that he couldn't soil them. The circus offered him for a song, and Funjungle snatched him up in a second. The hippo was renamed Henry and delivered to Funjungle with great fanfare. The marketing department turned Henry's journey across the country into a national media event. They made no secret that Henry had been bought, or rather rescued, from a circus. It was a much better story that way. Specifically designed semi, with its own built-in pool, was constructed to transport Henry. In each town he passed through, families lined the streets to see him. His arrival at Funjungle had been celebrated with a huge party. Even though the zoo wasn't open yet, thousands of people had come to get their first glimpse of Henry and consume a giant hippo-shaped cake. The next morning, within the space of 45 minutes, Henry bit 1 keeper and then showered none other than Martin Delgado himself with poop. It was at this point that Doc, who knew Brutus's reputation, determined that Funjungle had been hoodwinked. Martin was livid. J.J. McCracken was even angrier. The entire animal purchasing department was fired on the spot, and the marketing department began damage control. Plexiglass just-in-case shields were quickly installed along the walls of Henry's enclosure to protect the public from hippo poop. Hildegard, the only other hippo Funjungle had managed to acquire, was removed from Henry's enclosure. All keepers were given orders to stay the heck away from Henry unless armed with electric cattle prods. And even then, they were only to approach him at night, since he was on display during the day. A feeding system was designed to keep his contact with humans to a minimum. The emergency measures seemed to work. Henry still fired feces at visitors on occasion, but the shields protected them, and the kids thought it was funny. Still, in the name of good hygiene, cleaning crews were on call during park hours to clean up the messes as quickly as possible. In the meantime, Martin had his minions desperately combing the world for a new male hippo that could be secretly swapped out with Henry. After all hippos basically looked the same. People could usually tell the difference between a male and female, which was why Funjungle's administration hadn't tried to pass Hildegard off as Henry. Although, believe me, they'd tried. They'd thought about it. But no one really would know if Henry had suddenly been replaced with another male. SeaWorld did it all the time with killer whales. Some of the parks were on their 10th Shamu already. If the new Henry had already been found, the death of the old Henry probably wouldn't have bothered many people at the park. Not even its keepers. But his death now, so shortly after the park had opened, was most likely going to be a public relations disaster. By the time I returned to Hippo River, damage control was well underway. Temporary fences had already been erected around Henry's paddock, and signs were posted every 10 feet announcing, "Sorry, this attraction is temporarily closed to improve your enjoyments." Ironically, the only signs Funjungle had with this message featured Henry Hippo. A phalanx of young employees had been deployed to allay any concerns guests might have, and any guest who asked about Henry was told he was off display due to medical reasons. Any guest who complained he was dead was immediately refunded their entry fee and given a coupon for 10% off Funjungle merchandise to boot. Meanwhile, a crane was being brought over from one of the construction sites to hoist Henry's body out of his pool the moment the last visitor left for the day. Martin was in the midst of everything, working 2 cell phones at once. He frowned when he saw me approaching alone. "Where's Doc?" he demanded, "doing surgery on a warthog." "Now? Did you make it clear to him how urgent this situation is?" "Yes, but he said Henry's not going to get any better." Martin glared at me a moment, then rubbed his temples. "Did Doc by any chance indicate when he might feel like joining us?" "Shouldn't be too long. He's just lancing a boil." I hesitated a moment, then added, "He wants you to find a place to do the autopsy." As I feared, telling Martin this was like poking a cobra with a stick. His entire head turned red. "An autopsy?" he snapped. Everyone within earshot, including a lot of tourists, stopped in their tracks and turned to us. Martin mustered the best smile he could for them, then grabbed my arm and dragged me behind a stand of banana trees. It's bad enough that our mascot is dead. Now that Quack wants to cut it home open, where does he expect to do that? The animal hospital? Henry won't fit in the hospital. They don't make autopsy tables big enough for hippopotamuses. Martin nervously ran his fingers through what was left of his hair, not so much talking to me as with me nearby. "I mean, it's not like this is a human being. You could autopsy a human anywhere. This is a hippo, for Pete's sake. It's the size of a truck. And God knows what'll come out of him when Doc cuts him open. We'll have to sanitize the whole park." Martin paused and then thought a moment, like he was adding how much sanitizing the park would cost him. Then he turned to me and said, "I'm not doing that. I'm just burying Henry. Go tell Doc that, and then tell him to forget about the stupid warthog and get over here." I knew there was no point in arguing, so ran all the way back across the park to talk to Doc again. Funjungle was over a mile from end to end. It was nasty hot out. I was pouring sweat by the time I got back to Safariland. Doc didn't look much better. He'd lanced a boil, but it obviously hadn't been easy. He was covered with dirt and sweat, and there was a long bleeding scrape on his shin where the warthog had tusked him. My reappearance, along with the news that Martin didn't want to do the autopsy, didn't help his mood at all. "Go tell that knucklehead that an autopsy is standard operating procedure for any deceased zoo animal," he growled. "And tell him if we don't figure out why Henry died, it'll cost him money in the long run. That ought to get his attention." "How will it cost money?" "Suppose something toxic is leaking into Hippo River. The autopsy would tell us what to do, and then we could fix it. But if we don't do the autopsy, then we don't find out about the toxic leak, and the next thing you know, we're up to our necks in dead hippos. Ask Martin if he's comfortable with that." I ran back to Hippo River. By now, Funjungle had closed for the night. The last guest had left. Usually, the stores by the entrance stayed open an extra hour, to give the guests a chance to spend every last penny they had on Funjungle merchandise. But Martin had ordered everything shut down early that night. The crane had arrived, and the strongest employees in the park had wrapped a huge metal sling around Henry. Now the hippo's massive, dripping corpse was being winched out and loaded onto a flatbed trailer. The local news station had gotten wind that something was up. News vans were parked right outside the front gates, and park security was shooing camera crews away from trying to film the crane over the wall. I could see Large Marge up on a ladder, swatting a cameraman with a rolled-up newspaper. I found Martin and told him Doc's argument. He grimaced at the thought of more dead hippos and reluctantly conceded Doc was right. Great, one more thing I have to deal with. I thought of some places big enough to autopsy Henry, I told him. I'd had plenty of time to mull it over while running back and forth across the park. The employees' cafeteria is huge, plus the floors with linoleum, so it wouldn't be too hard to clean. Martin shook his head violently. No way. If the state health inspectors find out we've had a dead hippo anywhere near the food, they'll shut us down. Does it have to be indoors? We might be able to haul up some big chance and do it right in the entry plaza. Not a chance. It's only a matter of time before the news copters get here. I'm not letting them film it. Plus, we'll end up with every vulture in the state here by the time we're through. There was already a staggering amount of vultures wheeling overhead, lured by the smell of Henry's corpse. In the landscaping nearby, hidden from the TV cameras, members of the security team were trying to fend them off with BB guns, but it wasn't working. How about the Henry and Palace Theater then? There was a big auditorium near the entrance where a musical revue was performed 5 times a day, featuring actors dressed as Henry and other characters. It's got a big stage with a lot of lights, and since they have to move scenery in and out, there's these big doors that you could probably get Henry through. Martin started to shake his head again. Saying no to me was an automatic reflex for him. When it struck him, I'd had a good idea. He quickly dialed one of his phones and ordered whoever answered to start prepping the Henry and Palace Theater for an autopsy. Then he returned his attention to moving Henry's corpse. He didn't even bother to compliment me on a job well done or thank me for my help. I'd been hoping that, in return for my assistance, Martin might allow me to watch Henry's autopsy. Sure, it probably would have been disgusting, but it would be a heck lot more interesting than hanging around Monkey Mountain for the 100th time, waiting for Mom to finish her work. Only Martin made it clear he was done with me, and I knew he wasn't going to change his mind. The whole Henry situation had put him in a fouler mood than usual. I also knew I wouldn't do any better to ask Doc. Doc would never let me watch anything, not even the birth of a baby wild beast out in Safariland, and I'd seen 1,000 of those in Africa. None of this meant I couldn't see the autopsy, though. I'd only have to do it without permission, so while Martin was distracted, I slipped away and headed for the Henry and Palace Theater. At the time, I was merely looking for some entertainment. If I'd had any idea how much trouble sneaking into the autopsy would ultimately cause me, or how much danger I'd end up in, I never would have done it. Never in a million years.